Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the forum with the judges. We're a little late because we just thought a miracle might happen and Air New Zealand might get the other 3 judges here in time for the forum. But it's obviously not going to work, so we're here, the 4 of us, and because of that, I don't want to strain everybody. Their talent we want to preserve, so we'll probably shorten the session to about 45 minutes instead of an hour. And then we'll bring the next session forward by a few minutes after that because the subjects are somewhat contiguous. You'll see what we mean. Now, this particular forum is a little different from the ones we've had in the last 2 times we've been here in Queenstown with this particular idea, as well as finding out a little bit about these judges, because it's the only chance you really get to find out what makes them tick. We're going to try and find out what makes the instrument, the violin, tick. How do you decide what is a good violin, what is a bad violin? The violins of Cremona 300 and so years ago, are they better than the violins that are made today? All those tricky questions. Where do you buy a violin? What advice do you give to a student? So this is the sort of ground we'll try to cover in the next little while. So first of all, I'll introduce you to the judges. You've met them already. They came on stage. Well, Anne introduced them, but you'll meet them now. Young-ok Kim, here, judge from South Korea. Joseph Lim, who is in the United States now, I think. Am I right, still? And somebody who I'm very pleased arrived, even a little late, because otherwise we'd have had only 3 on the stage. It's Benjamin Schmidt from Austria. And Sarah Kim from Australia, who actually lives... Susie Park, I'm sorry. It's a long time since she's been a contestant. So Susie Park from Australia, who's now living in New York. So these are 4 of the 7 who will decide the fate of the 18 youngsters we'll be listening to and enjoying over the next little while. So I'm going to start with a question to Young-ok, because he's closest to me. What was the first violin you bought and why?
First violin I bought, I have been extremely lucky actually. It was 1966. It was a Stradivarius.
Well, that's a bit of luck. I wonder how many people have that sort of luck in 1960. I'm sure a Stradivarius didn't cost as much as it does now, then, right?
I hate to talk about money, but it cost, as I recall, $38,000 at the time.
$38,000 in 1960.
Sorry. Yes, excuse me, $38,000 at the time. And well, right now, I mean, you know.
Do you still have that Strad?
No, actually, instead of blaming myself, I thought it was an instrument that didn't, make me a better musician. So I changed about, I think since 1965, the last Stradivari that, I changed about 5 times. And in 1983, I found love of my life. And that instrument has been with me ever since.
And that's a Strad as well?
Yes, it's a 1716 Strad called Cecil. The reason it's called Cecil is that actually in 1790s, Cannes, in the southern the Provence, there was Count Cesole, actually, is the correct name. He actually bought that instrument at the time, and even Paganini played on it. He was a guest at his house. So famous instruments have the famous owner's name that comes with it. So. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
How's about this close? Is that all right? Yes.
Is this better? Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Think of the bow against the string. Would that help?
Sorry? Oh, yes, that definitely. My God. Then I'll have to kiss it.
Speaking of kissing, you said, well, the violin is now the love of your life.
Yes.
It's Well, it is a part of you, isn't it? It's part of your family. That's what it becomes.
Yes, it's more difficult than myself, and yes.
So if the violin's in a bad mood, you're in a bad mood, and vice versa.
Usually it's my fault.
Now, perhaps next question, this is one for Joseph. But before we get on to the question, Joseph, welcome back, because those of you who have been following the competition since 2001, you'll recognise Joseph as the winner of 2001, the very first competition, and he's now back here as a judge. But a lot of water's gone under the bridge. Yes, thank you. No, first fiddle of the Juilliard String Quartet. He's on the faculty of Juilliard. I mean, you've had a lot of things happen to you ever since. When you left here in 2001, you had an idea of where your career might go. Did you have an idea where it might go? Where you wanted it to go?
Not much of an idea.
Not much of an idea?
To neither question, neither where it was going nor where I wanted it to go necessarily.
It didn't. But what did you think in 2001 you wanted to do with your career?
It happened to be a time in my life where, or one of a number of times in my life where I could have gone in a number of different directions. I was about a year out of college, maybe that's called the university here, graduated in spring of 2000. And at that point I was fairly set on trying to give the music career, a real push. But shortly after Michael Hill, in 2001, of course, was an event that all of us will never forget, and that was the events of September 11th. And that made me think a lot about life, about what I wanted to do, or what I better do before who knows what would happen the next day. And that set me on a little bit of a course, an unplanned or unexpected course prior to that. I ended up spending, and many of you here, Sir Michael and Christine and Anne certainly, because it happened that in those subsequent few years I did come back to New Zealand, and they were aware of what I was doing when I wasn't in New Zealand, and it wasn't always specifically musical or specifically aimed at furthering my career. I spent a couple of years exploring China, living and studying and traveling throughout China, and the reasons for doing so were more personal, not so career-oriented. But it was a formative period of my life, and while I didn't know how it would affect my musical development and path, every experience does affect one artistically somehow, and I think it has all come into the picture in one way or another.
And so you've come back to music absolutely as your number one career, but informed by your life experience in between here and now.
I think so.
Right,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Now, here's the question for you about violins. What is more important, the violin or the performance of the work? To make a successful performance, is it the performance or is it the violin? What contributes, what degree?
To me, there's no doubt it's the performance or the performer. There's just absolutely no question. And those of us who have been doing this for much of our lives can easily discount a poor instrument and, see and hear the talent in the player, even if the poor instrument is affecting the performance. We can identify what it can be attributed to the poor violin, and in fact, therefore, give perhaps even more credit where it's due, which is the performer overcoming whatever shortcomings there are in the instrument. So to me, there's no question.
And the violin provides the cream on the performance, yes?
Yeah. However, if you wish to pursue that question further, and maybe it's something that I am only beginning to get a sense of, a great instrument can certainly allow for added levels and layers of a voice developing that a poor or a lesser instrument wouldn't enable. So that it adds on top of something that, or a person who already has talent may end up developing more of a voice with a great instrument.
Thank you. It's a life process, isn't it?
Yes,
Better
absolutely.
and better. Benjamin, question for you now. Now, this is a man who's been on television a lot. He's done a tremendous amount for taking music, the violin, to the world through DVDs and television broadcasts, and it's quite a thing to attempt that. Some people would just shy away from it, but he does it, and very successfully. And not only that, his performances include not only the old masters, but he has a really strong interest in the contemporary and also in jazz and in fusion. Benjamin, in fusion? No?
Just call it jazz.
Just call it jazz. It's all jazz. So when you first chose a violin, was the violin your first instrument, or were you piano or something else, or was it a mistake?
No, the piano was the mistake. I started off with the piano. My grandfather had us for lessons after we came home from the kindergarten. And he was actually more a violinist than a pianist, but he played many instruments. But piano was the first, and I don't think I showed too much interest or talent in that, although I still play piano. But then I heard my grandfather play the violin, and also my father would love to do chamber music with violinist friends. So, and very soon I would ask my father to, when will you finally buy me a violin? That was the question. So I didn't have to wait long, and there it was, and that was pretty much the decision already.
How did you choose it? What were the parameters of choosing a violin that would suit you?
You know, it's actually before I can recall anything, because I was 4 years old, but I do...
Was it a full-size violin, 4?
It was an 8, I think, yeah. So many people start with 4, so that's not really an exception. But I was between 4 and 5. But I recall one sensation of listening to the Mozart sonatas played by a friend with my father. Somehow that is still in my memory of pictures. So I guess, I got a taste of the beauty. And this friend, he was a professional violinist, and then we also went to a recital of his, which might have been later. And it was very impressive to me how you could get elegant sounds out of that instrument, yeah.
When did you have your first formal violin lessons? How old were you?
Well, it was with this friend, and I was almost five, and it was very easy still and very childlike. And if I rather played soccer, he would let me play soccer, so it was quite easy at first.
Well, at first. What happened after the at first?
Well, I can sum it up really quickly, because I think here we are in this wonderful place, and with this competition to find the new talents, and I feel a bit odd talking about my way, but I will give you a shortcut. I never lost interest in the instrument. I played like a child plays, and we did make music in the family with my sisters and my father, who was a very passionate pianist. So I think this kind of chamber music was the thing that always had me keep going. And eventually I did this youth competition with 9 years old and 11 years old, and it was the first confirmations of it might be more than just playing around with it. And then I had my first international competition with 16, which I did not win, but which got me very far, also in terms of engagements. But I still didn't feel ready, and I retired myself again, actually to the United States to study there a few years. And then I did another series of competitions, and I had lots of pleasure playing competitions, just to point that out as well. And then one led to the other, and after that, it's all the concerts that you will get and that you will be able to play to prove again that you're ready to have a voice for some giants like Brahms or Bartok.
Thank you. Thank you. Susie, for you. Got the name right this time. I'm very sorry about the introduction.
No worries.
Susie, we only met just out there about 5 minutes before we came in here. Now, obviously from your introductory remarks, competitions weren't the way you started your career. So how did it actually start? Although competitions, if they're there, they come later, but how did you start playing the fiddle?
Well, it was largely by my parents being perceptive more than anything that I did of my own volition. Apparently, as a little girl, I was a bit rambunctious and mischievous. And it was only when I listened to music that I would sit next to the speaker and calm down and just be still and want to sit there for hours and want to hear the record again. And I was also apparently singing things back after one hearing. I probably don't do that now, but apparently I did. And so my parents thought, okay, there's an aptitude. And when I was 2, my dad brought home a tiny little violin, 16th size, yep. And he took me to a teacher, and she said, she's too little, so bring her back in a year. And exactly a year later, I just began having lessons and playing. And yeah, it was pretty fun.
Still fun?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, it's definitely challenging, and it pushes you, or you push yourself, but it's rewarding, absolutely.
You've been involved quite solidly in chamber music, touring chamber music, as well as solo performance with orchestra and so forth. Have you got a preference?
I enjoy doing everything, and I feel that everything benefits everything else. And as a musician, if you feel challenged, and it's all these different mediums are so rewarding, and you get so much out of everything that you do, and you can bring so much because of the other experiences that you have. So, no, I think whatever I'm doing is what I'm enjoying the most.
Now, is it possible to have a violin for all seasons, for all repertoire? Surely the requirements of a violin in a romantic symphony, or a concerto, are far different from a string quartet, for example.
Well, I mean, there are certain aspects of playing that define or at least bring, for example, if you're playing a solo concerto and you're thinking about projecting to the back of a hall and that kind of thing, you do want an instrument that will speak, even at a very soft dynamic. But the great instruments, I think, are the ones that you can express whatever you want, and it allows for that, and it adapts. And the capacity for that range is just there, and that's when you're really lucky and so, grateful for having something like that.
This conversation can get deeper and deeper now into modern versus the old. The masters of Cremona could never have envisioned, I don't think, the symphony orchestras we have today and the amount of power needed to get to a 300-seat concert hall. I mean, those things just weren't known back then. But there are Strads, for example, Guarneris, that will do that kind of magic today. Is that so, in spite of that wasn't their original purpose?
Yes, there are definitely instruments that exist, and they're absolute marvels. And if you have an opportunity to play something like that, or hear something like that, it's mesmerizing and transportative.
Well, I go back to Joseph, perhaps. If you closed your eyes and had a blind test, could you tell what kind of fiddle was being played? If not the maker, could you tell if it was a new or an old violin?
Perhaps. I'm really not an instrument connoisseur, so I don't quite have that ultra-sensitive awareness to distinguish between the great makers, but perhaps between generally a newer instrument and generally an older of the Cremonese early 18th century vintage. Perhaps that is a more obvious distinction.
What are you playing yourself at the moment?
That's a good question because it sort of traces the same span of time between when I was here for the competition in 2001, which was just a few months after I purchased the instrument that I'm still playing on today, and very happily so. And that's an instrument by a maker of that era, the Cremonese School of Violin making of the late 17th, early 18th century, and this maker was named Rogeri, Jean-Baptiste Rogeri. There's another maker with a similar last name, Ruggeri, or family of makers, Ruggeri, but this one spelled R-O-G-E-R-I. And for me, it has quite a bit of personal significance. I purchased that instrument early in 2001 from my first violin teacher, who had already stopped performing and basically also not much teaching. And when I had mentioned to her a couple months earlier that I had to return the instrument that I had been loaned during my time in college, she said, well, maybe it's time for me to sell. So she let me borrow her and try out her instrument for a couple of weeks. I played it for many people whose opinion I respected, and they all said, if you can get this instrument, you should. And fortunately, coming directly from her and not through a dealer made a big difference in the price, even if she wasn't trying to be kind to me. I mean, the dealer takes a huge cut out of these transactions, so I was fortunate to be able to purchase the instrument and to be able to play it and be very happy with it in this decade and a half.
And you knew also you got a genuine instrument.
That's right, yeah, genuine.
Because there are a few traps for new buyers of violins. I'm sure some of you know that.
Right.
Young-Ok, can I have a question to you, please, about if there's a young violinist here who's doing really well and wants to purchase a violin, what advice would you give? Where to look? Where to look for a suitable violin? Perhaps that.
I think that's one of the saddest thing for me to say is that right now it will be impossible for them to have a fine instrument without help of a foundation or a particular individual who wants to help the person. So, but you know, we talked about, a bit earlier about if there were two instruments, let's say from Cremona, that period, Guarnerius del Gesù, which was equal to like Stradivarius, I think I would be able to tell the difference between the del Gesù and Stradivarius, because I have played on both of them throughout my lives. But as far as performance is concerned, in the 60s, I'm sure all of you have heard of Pinchas Zuckerman, who is a very wonderful violinist, and we were studying at the same time. And he played Tchaikovsky concerto on a modern instrument that was made about, I think, 8 months before. And I must say, he sounded fabulous. So that's just another.
So it's to sound fabulous, and as we've heard already, a poor instrument in the hands of a really good musician will sound pretty good.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep. Now, perhaps the next question go to Benjamin. Would you mind? I'd like to ask you a little bit more about, it's about the violin, obviously, but it's about the work you do for television and DVDs and promoting because that's what it does. It promotes the instrument. You know, people who make these things do it only really because there's a commercial gain in it. There's not too much altruism, I don't think, unless it's funded by government or some foundation. But why is what you do on DVD and so forth successful? What's the repertoire? What do you do? Who asks you to do it and what?
I wasn't even aware that I do so much television work. It just happens between concerts, and then I have no idea who sees it, and then I get some mails from Australia back home in Europe. People see something of me. I certainly, I don't know if I get your question right, but I certainly didn't do DVDs to promote old instruments. I was lucky enough to play on old instruments, wonderful Italian Cremonese instruments for 20 years now, 25 years now, different instruments. And I think it's quite some luxury to be able to play on these instruments, but I must follow my colleagues here who say it is much more in the hands of the performer to make music than in the hands of the instrument. And we have so many great modern instruments nowadays that will sound fantastic with fantastic players. And it's proven many, many times. I have many soloists, colleagues who play on modern instruments. I think there is quite a few old instruments that have a crème de la crème on top, the luxury that the other ones don't have. But if we talk music, this question is very much overrated, I think. I have understanding that these old treasures of history, of mankind, of civilization, of craftsmanship, with a sticker of Stradivari or Guarneri, are getting very, very expensive with the time. It's an art market, and people who want those things get more and more, and instruments get less and less. Of course, the prices go through the roof with the times, but it's not so funny as a musician, this development, because practically none of the soloists of nowadays is able to buy an instrument by himself, one of these top instruments. And also through that rage, the whole question gets overrated, I think. So we should always keep in mind that a violinist has to find his voice, and that voice is not so much connected to the label that is put onto it. It can be many different instruments, and not saying that the Stradivarius or the Guarneris are one of the best and can sound wonderful, but as the colleagues just pointed out, it's much more in the hands of the player to make a sound and energy. Or I love the saying of Jascha Heifetz. Somebody came up to him, and you all know this story, but I have to tell it again, laughing already after the concert, and we said, it's a wonderful performance, but your instrument is just so great, and it was just really trying to say, and Jascha Heifetz would just put it to his ear and say, I don't hear anything. So, which is in a way very true. So I enjoy being on TV, but it was never for promoting the instrumental market that is already way too crazy, I think, for a musician's world. But I guess music also transfers itself very well in video and in television, but I didn't know that I was such a champion. I take it as a compliment, but the whole development with YouTube and other formats of video are overruling myself, and I have no control of what is on YouTube of me and of others, and I know so many artists who are better and worse than me that have millions more of views, so I don't understand the whole picture. It comes with the concert career, I guess.
Thank you. Well, I suppose you realize that you're on YouTube again right now, and you're streaming to the world. Anybody in front of a camera, just watch out, because this whole weekend is going live across the world. So that's where the Michael Hill Violin competition has got. It truly is international. So there you are. You're on the airwaves again. Susie, can I word to you? What's the violin you're playing at the moment? It's not your first violin by any means, but
No,
what is it?
it's a little bigger than that. It's a JV Guadagnini. It was made in 1740 in Piacenza.
How did you come across that violin?
Right. Okay. So I was a teenager living in Australia, and the Australian Broadcasting Corporation was making a documentary, actually much along the lines of this topic, violins and violinists and how they come to find each other. And I guess one of the producers wanted me to meet a gentleman, a violinist, and play on his instrument. And at that time I was playing an Italian, but not a great Italian, as you might label it typically. And I just remember the sensation of picking up this instrument and playing it and thinking, butter and cream and chocolate, and it was like honey and all those amazing things we get to experience as as humans. But it was just felt incredible, and I was like, oh my gosh, that people can actually play on instruments like these and have this kind of feeling and have this kind of sound come out. It was just an absolute epiphany and just opened this whole world of sound, and it's a huge realization. But in any case, it wasn't until I was a student at Curtis a few years later that I got a phone call from this man's wife, and unfortunately he had passed away, but she had remembered my strong reaction to this instrument and was asking if I'd like to acquire it, and I was very lucky to go ahead and get it. And an interesting story connected to that is when you purchase an instrument like that, you get papers and certification, and in there was the name of the prior owner, and that was Georgi Pauk, who I'd never actually met, but I knew of very well, and I was like, wow, I'm actually playing an instrument that was owned by this great musician. And so a couple of years into owning this instrument, I went and did the Indianapolis violin competition, and he came on as a last-minute substitute juror, and I was after my first round, and I thought I should maybe go up to him and just say, look, I think I'm playing on your instrument. And his reaction was also just very strong. He immediately teared up and said, oh my gosh, can I please see it? And of course, and he did, and he said, you don't understand, this was the instrument that all my hard work, all of the years of struggle and challenge, all the big competitions and performances I made was on this instrument, and it was a very meaningful thing to come back to it. And I'd like to think that that he didn't hold bias towards me as a competitor because I was playing this instrument, but no, it was really incredible to just be able to see that and witness something.
Isn't it true that of the great instruments, you are all caretakers of that instrument for the time you have them?
No, absolutely. I don't feel like I possess it. I feel like I'm lucky to take care of it and play it, and it's a gift.
I'm wondering if anybody could answer this question. There must surely be a contestant or somebody who is heading for a career and they're just about going to give it up. But suddenly there's a violin that they play that makes the difference and spears them on to success. Do you know if had any students like that a violin has made the difference to their career? We've all been lucky enough to have violins, I suppose, right from the start, by the sound of it.
No, I haven't heard one case, such a case. An instrument, I think, can only, as everybody here agrees, it can help you, but it surely doesn't make you or break you.
but it would spur you on to greater things. Susie, getting that violin would have changed you somehow, surely.
Well, I like to think that perhaps my sound, or my ear for sound, had developed a little differently than if I'd continued playing on that other instrument. And it definitely was able to just explore more, and just develop a bigger range of colors and broaden a palette. But I don't know about it making or breaking me. It's definitely, I tried to work hard. I would have, I think, gone as hard at it as if I were on any other instrument. So
Finding out what more this instrument that you had could
exactly,
do.
yeah. It's a very personal relationship, and it's like interaction with any other human being, and it's very unique. It's singular.
Don't you all worry about the instruments you have? I mean, there's the insurance, there's the making sure they're not stolen. I mean, this is a terrible burden. There's great stories. You've all got stories. Pierre's got a fantastic story about all of this. There are times when, you must feel that you have something so precious. And on the other hand, if it's stolen, what then, Have any of you had an experience like that where you've lost the instrument, even for a short time?
No, I have no experience, but I know how easy it is to travel. If you once travel without instrument, you feel the complete lightness of being. It's an amazing experience. But I had a meeting, actually it was a so-called Stradivari meeting, where we would play instruments, present instruments. Somebody would also talk about the instruments, about the beauty, about the history, and about the aspects of investment. And it was a good handful of very wealthy people. And at one point, one man stood up and said, and I understood that very well. He said, are you musicians crazy to go around the world with an instrument worth millions of dollars? How is that you do that? Why do you do that? That's completely crazy, he said. He was a non-musician. And I guess there was a lot of truth in his thinking, as honest and as spontaneous as it was. But I could feel for him.
So none of you have had the experience of losing your precious violin, yes?
Unfortunately, yes, once. It's terribly irresponsible of me. Actually, I had a concert in Lincoln, Nebraska, University of Nebraska, and my next concert was Ames, Iowa, University of Iowa. And to fly from there, I had to fly to Chicago and then to Des Moines, and so I decided to drive. So I rented a car, and I checked out of the hotel, and I think it took about 5 hours or so. And I arrived, I opened my trunk, took my luggage out, and I usually put my violin in the back seat. I opened, there was no violin. And my God, I'm shaking just thinking about that. It's just like leaving your child, I guess. And I didn't know what to do. And I had a concert in a couple of hours. So I called up the university, asked, can you call the hotel and see, is it possible that I left in my room? I don't know. It never happened. You know what happened was a miracle, actually. I left about 9 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, there was a young man who was looking for a job at the hotel. And the hotel manager told me, he came in, he said, somebody left a luggage on the sidewalk. He thought it was a luggage. So he took the instrument and gave it to the manager. And of course, when university called, they were aware of the fact that it was a violin, my violin. Luckily, somebody drove all the way to Des Moines, Iowa, and I was able to do the concert with that particular instrument. But can you imagine what a criminal I am? I feel so ashamed.
Like if you worried about all of those things, you'd never ever take up the career as a violinist. Is there anybody from the audience who would like to ask the judges a question? Have you got anything that you think that they might be able to answer? Make your enjoyment of this weekend greater? Yes? No? Brecken. Anybody want to answer that question? Who would like to do it? Mendiman.
Well, I think Antonio Stradivari built violin for more than 80 years of his life. So, and he apparently he built more than 1,000 instruments, and he was a true master of craftsmanship. And he had he could go through all the experience that a violin maker wants to go through. He went through different models and found his role model of the golden years, which is still the role model of today's violins. And it was, I think, pretty much recognized that he's a true master, and his instruments were already very sought after during his time. Of course, not comparable to the hype we have today, but they were sought after already. And I think that these instruments probably have a lot of qualities in common with the original, but then also develop other branches through also reconstruction of parts of the instruments, which was an adaptation to bigger halls and to modern strings. And I think the main point is that these instruments have been played by some of the best players throughout 200, almost 300 years. And I think that makes a lot of quality to any instrument. Any violin gets better if it's played well, even modern instruments, and very much so. And it's also why these Italian instruments have this incredible advantage of being played so long by really good players, because wood is a living material and it reacts to certain resonances. And if you are able to pull out the right sounds of that wood, it will respond to it and will get into that vibration more and more. I liked very much the example of Pinkas Zuckerman playing a violin that was 8 months old. I can very much imagine that sounds just terrific. So there's one of the secrets, I think, of the instruments. They were some of the best ever, and he was one of the best craftsmen ever, but they've been really grown into their fantastic sound role as well.
Yes, I'd like to add just a little part. Is that, Stradivari obviously, made many instruments. I think over almost 680 or 7. I don't know exact number.
We still have 400 left. Yeah.
But out of those, I would say large percentage of them doesn't sound that well. Actually, it's like a person who looks beautiful, but doesn't have the soul or the brain. But it's really, I would say, large percentage of them are really, it looks beautiful, and it's a piece of an art, obviously, but not all of them sound beautiful.
Very true. Yes.
That's the point.
Yes, I do have different instruments, but it also depends on the type of jazz I'm playing. For example, there have been written several jazz violin concertos for me that actually work with the usual combination of a symphonic orchestra or a string orchestra, and I would use a very good instrument to join into that sound. And then there's a lot of occasions playing with a rhythm section or with a band where sometimes violins also amplified, where I use a microphone and then I would go for a different instrument. And then there's the option of putting a pickup, so-called a pickup onto the bridge, which takes the sound directly from the violin, which is a very different sound and approach to violin playing, but also has his advantages. And then there is the electric violin that doesn't use resonance at all, which I almost don't use, but I also have experiences with that because that's when electronics really come in and can get very, very interesting. So there's different occasions, and I want to point out that one of the true masters of jazz violin, Stefan Grappelli of last century, wonderful violinist, had a very good Montagnana violin, and he was very keen having it and playing on it, and I think in his way of playing it was absolutely justified to play a top Italian instrument. So it depends very much on the circumstance, but I do use up to 5 different instruments for different occasions.
Time for one more question. Anybody? Brecken. Shall we go through the whole range, because there probably is a whole range here? Young Oak.
Yes, I think actually both are more difficult to find. It's more personal than actually finding instrument. You adjust to the violin because it's like a person, has its own personality, and you really have to be, it's extremely difficult. Like getting to know a person, truly to get to know a person. With bow, I must say, in my lifetime, I must have tried over 300 bows. And I haven't found my love yet. So I'm still looking.
Joseph.
Just to speak to that question, that's absolutely, that point is right on the mark. I think certainly I find that with my students, that last large step of developing sound and technique and ultimately a voice and a poetic voice comes not in the left hand, that's basic, but in right hand finesse, that is bow technique. So it's in bow technique, and it is in the bow perhaps, which, yeah, I think probably more so. I only have one instrument that I perform on, but I do have at any given time probably 2 bows that I would alternate between for different types of pieces. I'm also not particularly a bow connoisseur, and they do get extremely expensive. I mean, outlandishly expensive for a piece of wood, a stick of wood. And I've never played on a very expensive bow. It's possible, I'm trying to think when I was here doing the competition. Bows also work with different instruments, so I had just left the previous instrument, which was an older American instrument by Carl Becker Sr. of Chicago from the early 20th century. And I had a certain French bow, a solid, rather solid stick that worked well, strong stick that worked well for that somewhat more modern instrument. But I quickly realized with the Rogeri that I needed to find something else. So I can't remember what I played on in 2001, which bow. It just so happened that I've used for quite a while rather extremely inexpensive bows actually. For a while I was using a Coda bow, a carbon fiber bow as my main bow, and then for another 5 years or more after that, my main bow was a $500 Taiwanese bow that seemed to do things quite well. I always knew that these were not the final solutions, but I mean, again, price is a major factor. Right now, I alternate between that Taiwanese bow and a French bow that I purchased a couple of years ago. And the French bow certainly has a more finesse to it, more possibilities of color. It happens that I use that cheap Taiwanese bow, which has a pretty decent sound, but I use it specifically for repertoire, usually more modern repertoire, that requires a lot of colegno, and especially colegno battuto, where you actually have to beat the bow wood side on the strings, and I take pride in the fact that it has these marks on it. So especially if you have bowed colegno, for the way we usually keep our bows nice and polished, you hear nothing if you bow colegno unless there are actually beaten in scars in your bow. Then colegno bowed sounds very haunting.
Yeah,
Benjamin.
very true. I agree. The bow arm is in the end more important. I think it was Violin who said that, but maybe it was Fritz Kreisler, which would I appreciate very much, as he was our most famous Austrian fellow. And I can recommend Grand Adam. That's an old French bow, and I have reached new dimensions of playing with orchestra with that bow. I'm very happy with that bow, but I also went through different stages, and I would say you need a different bow for every composer. Or you need a different bow if you are playing with orchestra, 50 musicians behind you, or maybe just a solo recital, or with string quartet. That requires different bows, but in the end, it's again, the bow arm will be much more important than the bow itself. Because the bow arm always has to do things that the bow has to do before. It has to anticipate anything that the bow should do, and that's why the bow technique of the player is way more important than the name of the bow. But we need decent bows. I mean, we are talking good bows, but there's many modern ones and fantastic old ones.
Now, we'll leave the last word to a lady. I think that's fair. Next, Susie.
I'm fortunate to have a nice French bow, and I think the relationship between the bow and the instrument is much like a relationship between two people. Obviously, also the relationship between the bow arm and the bow is paramount. But actually, I recently acquired a carbon fiber bow just because of international travel and restrictions on some of the older bows. But I was so excited to find that you can really get a lot of color, and you can actually be a little bit more aggressive with it, and that it will be able to take it. So yeah, I think I agree with what has been said, that it's a bow for every occasion. Why not, if you can? But yeah, obviously it comes back to the arm that's attached to it in the end.
Thank you. Well, I think we've enjoyed this discussion very much, and I know that young Kim is relieved, because when I first met him today, he thought I said that we're going to discuss young and old violinists. Just the violin, and as it happens, the bow. Thank you very much for coming on stage and giving us your insight, your expertise, and I hope you enjoy your judging experience here in Queenstown. Thank you, everybody. Please give them a hand.